Good morning and good morning, everyone. Possibly afternoon for some, depending on where you are tuning in from. It is truly an honor to start off 2024 with this webinar, with our State of the Field webinar. It's hard to believe this is our third one, and we have a lot to share. Before we jump into the webinar, I want to just take a moment to bring us back to the excitement that so many of us experienced while we were in Atlanta for our social emotional learning exchange conference. And Tim, the last time I saw you in person was at the exchange. So why don't we take everyone back to what we were able to experience firsthand? Thank you so much for sharing just a clip of the video. One of the most amazing portions of the conference was not only the exchange of information, of ideas, but also showcasing the brilliance of the next generation and showcasing student talent. It was truly just an extraordinary time. In the past, these State of the Field webinars, it has actually been flipped. Tim has actually, Dr. Tim Shriver, who is our chairman of CASEL, has introduced me. However, this year, because it is a special year for CASEL, we are actually turning the tables. This year, CASEL will be celebrating its 30th anniversary. And just in reflecting back over 30 years and where the field has not only come from, but the direction that it's going, it's such an exciting time to be a part of this community. So, Tim, we'd like to start off with turning the first question to you. As we think about the 30th anniversary, as we think about 30 years of social emotional learning, how does the history of this movement not only connect to what we are experiencing right now, but really how we should be moving into the future? You're on mute, Tim.
Thank you, Dr. Samuel, and thank you all 300 plus for joining us now. And I think we have over 1,000, maybe 1,500 folks who are interested in continuing the conversation and continuing to stay engaged, trying to continue to sharpen our skills so we're on the cutting edge of what matters most to our children. That's what this field is all about. It's what it's always has been about. I have a great privilege, Aaliyah, as you know, to start my career in education in New Haven, Connecticut, where I was kind of, without even knowing it, in the New Haven public schools and in the Upward Bound program I worked in. I was surrounded by giants. I started to realize it when I first heard about the work of Dr. James Comer. And you can see there his book that came out shortly after I started my career, School Power, which shook the very foundations of how so many of us as educators thought about education. Dr. Comer charged into the field as a child psychiatrist, as a medical doctor, as a person of color, obviously, as a person whose family, brothers and sisters were so successful and dramatically impacting the world with their professional achievements. His mom, the subject of one of his later books, Maggie's American Dream, a pioneering woman, strong as could possibly be. Dr. Comer came into the schools and he saw almost intuitively a fundamental issue which wasn't being addressed. And as he explained it to me when I went to train with him for a year, he said the fundamental science of education has to be the cultivation and the strengthening of relationships. He said people talk about content and it's important, and people talk about curriculum and it's important. But what he saw was that there was a trust gap between families and schools. There was a trust gap between children and their teachers, that there was a trust gap even between children and each other. that these fissures in our relationships, the tension, the unresolved anger and hostility, the ways in which we didn't cultivate relationships, they were the primary ways in which learning was being damaged. And they were the primary pathway to strengthening learning. If you could strengthen relationships, support development, as Dr. Comer said, we could strengthen the entire outcome of education. We could improve test scores if we improved the social fabric of the school. And then, I got the great privilege of meeting Dr. Roger Weisberg, who was the time earlier in his career, trying to take practical steps. So how do you do that? I mean, it's one thing to say it. It's another thing to figure out how to do it in the classroom. Dr. Comer was looking at systems. How do you get families and everyone involved in thinking differently? Roger was about how do you learn the skills to work and operate differently. So you see here his legendary problem-solving poster, which I learned, I don't know, it's probably 25 or 6. And when Roger came in to teach these skills to some of us who were interested in implementing these in the New Haven public schools. But Roger's gift was to say there are concrete ways we can learn how to strengthen our relationships. We can self-regulate. We can stop, calm down, and think. We can say the problem. We can identify feelings in the problem. We can set a goal, and without just rashly responding to a problem, we can methodically think through how to achieve the goal. And this came as something of a revolution. There were colleagues of Rogers around the country doing similar work, colleagues of Dr. Comer's following his example. These giants, if you will, came together. And the social and emotional learning words, even those words came together in those early days. And we came to believe, have a conviction that these giants were leading us into almost what I'd call a giant challenge, which is how do we create an evidence-based field with the best scholars, the best practitioners, the best educators, the best policymakers, because Dr. Comer was already challenging the United States government and state governments. You got to allocate resources for these kinds of things. We've got to focus on training teachers in these areas. We've got to change the way we structure our outcome standards and so on to include them. So from the beginning, Aaliyah, we were told you got to use evidence. You've got to focus on the social and emotional and academic connection. You've got to teach skills. You've got to focus on systems, and you got to change policies. And if you think of that formula, that's exactly where we are today, still at it. And as much as the world has changed, 30 or 40 or 50 years, the fundamental nature of this field's capacity to respond to the needs of children and families, and I dare say the systems in our country, the needs of adults and the challenges to adults, fundamental premises of the field were laid back in the 60s and 70s and 80s, and we're still at it to try to build on what these great giants taught us.
Tim, I couldn't agree with you more. And the beauty of us doing this is we often just kind of go in our own direction. So I think I'm gonna take us down the same path, but I just want to highlight real-time conversations that I've had in the field. One of the beauties of this role is I have an opportunity to engage with constituents all across the US. And just in the last week, there were 2 critical conversations that I was able to participate in. One was around chronic absenteeism rates and why are so many of our young people still absent from school? Another really critical conversation was just earlier this week it was a youth policy summit that was led by young people. We're talking ages 12 to 25, talking about what are the priorities for young people right now and how they're trying to navigate the education system, the health system, and at its core, strengthening relationships, closing the trust gap, really having systems and policies that support our young people today are at the core of the conversation. And it is truly a full circle moment to think about all of the conditions that created CASEL and this movement around social emotional learning almost 30 years ago, and the ever-present reality of why it's so critically important now. And I would just want to take it up one notch even more to highlight a point that it's not just our students and our young people, it's the adults as well who are absolutely wanting to understand how these skills show up in the workplace, how these skills show up in families, and because families are systems too, and at the community level. So it is, the work has, in my very humble opinion, is honestly more critical now and will continue to be critical as our society changes because of technology, because of the pandemic, and we can go on and on. And so I would love to ask you just one more question of, are you sometimes in awe of where the movement is now, 30 years later?
Well, first of all, your comments are so well taken, Aaliyah, and I just want to compliment them by saying sometimes I look around the country and our country looks to me like a school in need of a social and emotional learning program. Our country, people checking out, fights in the cafeteria, um, um, struggles, staff that doesn't feel supported, uh, kids that don't feel engaged. The very appearance of the kind of school that led Jim Comer, the kind of conditions that led Jim Comer and Roger and Mark Greenberg and many, many others to create the foundations of this field. That's what our country looks like today. We're a country in need of social and emotional learning for the adults, for the families, for the business leaders, for the faith-based leaders, for the educators, not just for the kids. In some ways, I mean, I don't want to put it as a negative or a positive, but kids aren't the challenge. I mean, I was in a school in Iowa recently where one of the kids said to me, "You keep asking about bullying. The bullies around here are the adults, Mr. Shriver," she said to me, eighth grade student. So we have a social and emotional fabric falling apart in our country, for better or for worse. So the skills we're teaching here, or the skills we've learned, are really helpful. Like, we know empathy is a really important skill, and it can be taught, and it can be measured, and we can see the correlation between higher degrees of empathy and many other outcomes. We know stress management and self-regulation can be taught. We know help seeking can be taught. Here, we've got on this slide here, you can see skills around fostering civil discourse. You see 3 examples, but there's probably 50 or 100 curricula that have similar examples here. You see one here from the Harmony program that's at the K2 level. You see one from Second Step that's at the middle school level, from Facing History at the high school level. These are concrete skills for our kids, but you're absolutely right. The teachers need them too. And when I look at this, all the way back to your question, and I think to myself, the extraordinary people who are working so hard in this, and the hundreds and hundreds of educators and funders and policy leaders who are focusing on this, I am in awe. You can dream, as we did, 6, 8, 10, 12, 15, then 50 of us. Well, let's build a field. But in the back of your mind, you're thinking, well, no, we're not going to build a field. Maybe we'll just get our program started, or get some training done, or get some funding for some new research projects and things like that. But here's the truth. This was an idea whose time had come. And whether it had been us or someone else, educators, families, political figures, they all knew and were looking for this field. And so even though, and we'll get into the politics of this because it's not simple and there is pushback, all we did, in a sense, as a collective group of people in building CASEL and in identifying this field, all we did was tap into a hunger that was already out there. And hundreds and thousands of educators have rushed into the gap and filled it out with lesson plans like you just saw. And I am, I just admire so much the people in our field. I just have so much respect for the hard work that educators do. And I just feel like I've said this a couple of times, if I were looking for a group of people who could help heal our country, build a new version of our country for the future, um, lay a new foundation that respect and dignity and empathy for every American, and equity and treatment of everyone. Uh, if I were to say who can do that, I'd say it's educators. I'd say the people in this field have the greatest power to make a difference for the future of our country, um, of any group in the country. So that's why, even as there's so many things going on there, I'm always trying to get back to a school. I still miss my days in schools and love the chance to see what people are doing, and I am in awe of it.
Yeah. So Tim, I've been watching the Q&A, and there is a question which we'll hold it around the civil discourse and how are we engaging on the politics. So we'll definitely come back to that. And for me, what is interesting to see, to your point on the tapping into the hunger around this issue, the more that I talk to students and also just pay attention to who is engaging in this work, it is fascinating. Just at the conference alone, we had 35 countries represented.
Yeah,
So this
yeah,
dialogue and the hunger for approaches to social emotional learning, the skills, it is not just a US hunger, but it is a global hunger because there is a real recognition we have to do something.
yeah.
So, Tim, let's talk about practice before we get into the politics of it. That's the fun part. Let's talk about the practice components. Um, from your lens, uh, what are some of the challenges and opportunities? I'm happy to share some of the things that I see. I spend a lot of time out on the road. I do believe that my role as the leader of the organization now is to spend time in the field and learn from the field to be able to not only help and guide us as we continue to be a field building organization, a field leading organization, we have to spend time in the field understanding the challenges and the opportunities. And so if we could just spend some time there, and I don't know if you want to go first or if you'd like me to go first.
Well, I think if we talk about the state of the field, one of the critical challenges we face is around quality of implementation. And as we do and think about quality implementation, to start to sort out all the different questions, there's so many questions. Which skills at what ages? Which skills are the most helpful to address mental health issues versus behavioral issues versus social or community issues? Which skills are most important to emphasize in community-based organizations versus those that belong in classrooms? How do we think about the integration of the arts, sports, and other cultural institutions that children are part of in the school with the overall social fabric of the school? And you've already identified a big one on implementation. What's the role of training adults? So many adults we talk to feel under-equipped to be able to support the social and emotional development of children. They want to be able to, they're eager to try, but they feel like they need training, and they need to address their own issues, their own stress, their own biases, their own frustrations. So we've got a whole sort of era of challenges around how we train the next generation of the workforce and how we train this workforce to give them a fair chance to be good at this work so that they feel competent and reinforced and effective, and they can see the results in their kids. You know, if you think about implementation, generally speaking, in education conversations, like if you think about all the fads, like that we if you've been in the field 5 years, you've probably seen two fads, and if you've been in the field 15 years, you've seen five fads, and if you've been in the field 30 or 40 years, you've seen 10 fads. And most educators are just trained to watch them come and let them go. What we want to have be different about this work, to avoid that fad kind of dimension, is to take very seriously the challenges of deep enculturation, systematic adoption, uh, comprehensive support system. So we think not of a program, but we think of a K-12 curriculum. We think not just of a curriculum, but we think about a workforce and adult agenda. We think not just about adults and kids, but about discipline and structures and plans and policies. And we think not just about those things, but we think about the research and evidence that can lead to continuous improvement. If you don't think about all those things, you're going to have a fad. And so this is a giant challenge right now. You know, you've shared this before. 70, 80, 90% of educators want, and parents and kids want SEL. And many say they're doing it. But we got to be honest in saying if we're not rigorous about the quality, we're gonna sow the seeds of our own destruction by asking people to do things they don't feel prepared to do, and then they don't do it well, and then they give up, and then other people judge them as being a failure, and then we are chased out of buildings. That's a big challenge.
Yeah, Tim, I want to build on this point around professional development. I had an opportunity to talk to an educator. It was an educator in New York who I asked the question, why has the professional development been so important to you? And this is a veteran teacher. And she said, because finally I had the words. I was able to actually learn the words, how to respond. She said, you're managing the behaviors anyway. You're doing the work anyway. And she said, I was doing my best, but I didn't have the formal training to understand how to promote the skills, how to ensure implementation. And if we are not focusing on supporting the educators, we are absolutely not going to have the impact that we have. And I want to stay on this educator vein because as we also address the chronic absenteeism rates of students, what we're seeing in the data is the chronic absenteeism rates for educators are matching the students now. So our teachers not showing up in the classroom and schools because they also are exhausted. They also are burned out. So we have to think about those supports. I would love to also highlight a couple of other real opportunities that I think we have that we, in this moment, we need to be focusing on. And one is technology, the impact of whether it is AI or just technology platforms that are utilized. And what does that mean? Continuing to think about the integration of social emotional learning into out of school time, across all of the sciences, because really what we know is that these skills are not just critical for academic success, but workforce success. You talk to any employer about why most people are fired or let go, and because of the absence of these skills, not being able to work cooperatively in groups, not being able to communicate effectively, all of the things that we're talking about. I also would love to showcase our 10 indicators slide because the systemic approach to SEL is one from a practice perspective that is really important to underscore. And how do we align the research and the evidence around those 10 indicators to be able to touch classrooms, schools, families, communities? And so when we talk about what does SEL look like, when we talk about the systemic approach, when we talk about improved integration, looking at these indicators to really hone in on all of the various tenets of what social emotional learning is. And I'm curious, Tim, as we think about this movement, we think about this time, whether it be politically or from a practice perspective, are there certain indicators that you would call out? Not to say that one is more important than others, but in this moment, are there some that really call your
Well,
attention?
I think the one I'm gonna take a chance, Aaliyah, and go to one that might seem controversial, although I can't believe we're at a point where it does seem controversial. The one under families, authentic family partnerships. Uh, Several questions in the chat. You know, people are so frustrated by our politics and the politics of this parent group against that parent group, or pitting parents against educators, or pitting educators against parents, or educators saying we don't want parents, or parents saying we don't like educators. I mean, all that is, to me, painful, unnecessary noise. I have never met a good teacher, or I don't know if I've ever met a teacher who doesn't want parent involvement. And I don't ever remember meeting a parent who doesn't want to be heard and contribute to the support of their kids' education. It's just ridiculous that we would pit parents politically on purpose against their educators. So this question here of how do we mobilize and engage parents in meaningful ways in our country right now to avoid the polarizations? People will say, like, they're talking about banning SEL language in some places. Parents are pushing for this. Often the same parents are pushing to teach hope, or to teach personal responsibility, or to teach the value of showing up at school, or to teach respect for other people's property, all of which we want are part of the social and emotional learning fabric. Now, you know, managing the political chaos is maybe not our agenda today, although I have thoughts on that. Uh, but we ought to try as best we can, in my view, to really neutralize political noise and deeply engage parents in this work. Authentic family partnerships and community partnerships. If parents really want a program at the fourth grade level, or they have a chance to understand what's being taught in kindergarten or sixth grade, or they understand why the discipline strategy is moving from a punitive to a restorative strategy, I think the vast majority are going to say yes. And if parents see that we're helping your children become more empathic and more engaged in their learning at the same time, most parents are going to go yes. But when they hear, I'm sorry to say this, when they hear a political attack, they get scared. Wait a second. What are they doing to our kids? What are they doing to my kid? And who are they? And where are they coming from? And who's she and who's he? And they get and you know, when any of us feel that way, we react. So I think I would just underscore here that whether we come from more progressive traditions or more conservative traditions, authentic family partnerships are a core ingredient in it's what Jim Comer said 40 years ago in the book. You know, it was the first thing, his first way in which he was characterized was a guy, oh, he wants parent involvement. Yes. Amen. Yeah, he did. So this is a central piece that I think, you know, I talked to an educator not too long ago who was being, you know, viciously attacked by a particular parent group trying to throw the program out. He reached out to the leader of the parent group and asked her, in this case, would she come and watch a lesson? The next day, he got a beautiful letter from her saying, I had no idea what you're teaching. And I can't, how can I support this? So I think we're in, the system is so inflamed, it's so hyper aroused, you know, like we're in such a tense mode culturally and politically that we forget that one there. So that's, I mean, all of these are important for sure, but I think right now that's the one I'd pull out if I had to choose one. What about you? Let me throw it back at you.
Well, as a parent of two school-aged kids, I have to agree wholeheartedly. And in every sense, the teachers that I, as a parent, have the stronger relationships with have been my favorite teachers. There, it goes back into Dr. Comer's piece on closing that trust gap, because my children are my most precious things. So to know that they're leaving me as a whole, happy, healthy child, and I'm placing them now in the hands of an educator who can nurture that and water that. And as I talk to parents, whether it is, I'm thinking about where I've been in the last 6 months, whether it has been Ohio or Texas or Florida or Washington State, or even in my home state at a football game, my kids play football. When you talk to parents about what they want in these skills, they want their children to be able to make friends, to have a social environment where they can be accepted, where they can interact. They want their kids to have a relationship with their teacher. So this piece, to your point, when you really get under the hood and just have a dialogue, we at the core want the same things for our children. And I'm also reminded that two things, a comment that Carrie Rodriguez from the National Parents Union said, we have to move past transactional relationships with parents to transformational relationships. And at its core, that is what we're talking about. I'm also reminded of one of our school districts in Texas, it's El Paso, When they began implementing SEL years ago, they were insistent that the work had to be done in partnerships with families, period. They brought together a committee that included families, teachers, counselors, community members, and others to identify, to your point, what SEL programs and strategies would not only be culturally responsive, but appropriate for their community. And since then, they have been able to roll out school-wide SEL implementation across the district that does just that. It brings families in together. It brings activities not just into the school, into the home. And having the leadership from the top, the superintendent sharing that focus on SEL and relationships has made them better able to not only withstand the pandemic, but come out of it stronger as well. So we do see examples of this across the country happening.
Yeah, it's so important for us, I think, to not play the politics game, if I can put it that way. The temptation is, and I see so many questions that we're getting attacked by this group, the legislature's trying to do this, and you know, I have an enormous empathy for the distress many of our colleagues are feeling because they're coming under political attack. I grew up in a political family. The normal reaction to a political attack is a counterattack. And I guess I want to put in a plea here for us to use very high quality evidence-based SEL strategies instead of political strategies. And the best I can suggest here is that if we went back to the slide that had the skills for disagreeing without, maybe we could do that just for a second. And I can't remember exactly which ones are on there. Yeah, here. So it's very fine print, but you can see what over in the left for kindergarten, pre-K to second grade. Stand tall, look at the other person, use a confident, respectful voice, use kind words, and try in a different way. That can be taught to 6-year-olds. Now, that doesn't mean it's easy.
Right.
And when you get to when you get to more complicated communications as we all get older, and many of this is being done in legislatures and stuff, I think the most disarming thing we can say to someone who's attacking us is, tell me more of what concerns you. Help me to understand what you'd like to see as the kinds of things that support children's relationships and development at school. Help me to understand your vision for, and some people will use language around values, and some people will use language around skills. Others will use language around systems. We're vulnerable to being, because of the way the country is, this movement is vulnerable to being attacked by the whole spectrum, ideological spectrum. But we're also capable of integrating the issues across the spectrum. If we listen deeply and if we adapt to the needs of parents and communities, it's not going to look the same, SEL, in every community. And it shouldn't, right? It shouldn't look the same. We should always be looking for evidence that the programs we recommend and implement work. We should always be looking for buy-in and support from parents and community leaders to make sure that the programs will be integrated. We should always be looking for systems level support. These are some of the ingredients and criteria. But that doesn't mean everybody has to learn the same version of these skills. And some places may want to emphasize, that's okay if you want to put a greater emphasis on one piece of the puzzle or another. That's not something we should oppose. So I think the challenge for us is to be in the debate about what matters most in our country, which by definition will be political in some ways, but not to use political tactics of us versus them, to try as much as we can to be really good listeners and really good integrators of the questions and concerns that children themselves, teachers, parents, administrators, other leaders in the community bring to us. It's galling when someone attacks you. I mean, we've all been attacked, so it's no special prize. But your first reaction is, that's a lie, or I got to get back at them. And I found, I go back to some of that you see Roger's notebook behind me that goes all the way back to the early '80s. I open it up and I get a lesson plan and I fill out a worksheet, and you'd be surprised how good our field can be at helping people, helping us all manage this conflict, and maybe in some ways, not avoiding speaking our truth, not shrinking from standing our ground, but doing those things, speaking our truth and standing our ground in a way that looks for the positive intent in the other and tries as much as possible to see the dignity of the other as a means to resolving the dispute.
That makes me think of one critical SEL skill is curiosity, how to approach conversations from a curious perspective. And not plugging this show at all, but I'm a big Ted Lasso fan. And one of my favorite was when he says, be curious and not judgmental. And if we approach more conversations through that lens of curiosity, and then also utilizing the skills that we're talking about are so critical of self-management, to realize, this might be a hard conversation, so I have to manage my emotions and what I'm thinking to really hear this person out. It is having a self-awareness of recognizing your lived experiences, your perspective may not be the same as somebody else. So how do you allow to open yourself up so that it's so critical?
Aaliyah, if I can, I mean, not that this is exactly what people are maybe listening for, but the statistics suggest that about 100 million of us, just in the United States, have broken a relationship within our own families right now. So if we've got a couple hundred people, or maybe a couple thousand ultimately, that listen to this, that means that 300 of us right now are dealing with a broken relationship in our families. I am right now. Family members who are tearing each other apart. I can just tell you on my text messages with my own family members, I am continually putting in. I want to be curious. I'm listening to my School Connect guide folks. I want to be curious and not furious. Tell me more. It's a simple question. Please tell me more. Help me to understand. I don't think they think I'm shrinking from my point of view, but I do think that all of us, we're fragile right now. We need the benefit of the best thinking in this field to help us through this moment in time, not just for our schools, but for each other. And in my case, at least, for my own family.
I agree, Tim. And this makes me think we should pivot a little bit to the evidence, to your point, the best thinking. We want to make sure that what we are putting into schools or suggesting is based on the evidence. And so from your perspective, as we think about 30 years of evidence in this field, what is it telling us now? And what should we be considering as the world is changing?
Yeah, I mean, I think the headline here, Aaliyah, is will sound maybe it'll sound repetitive to people on this call. The headline here is, in the most recent meta-analysis by Chris Cipriani and others, the headline has been reinforced over and over in hundreds and hundreds of studies across this field, that when social and emotional learning programs are well implemented with adequate training, that are evidence-based programs, we see improvements in behavior, reductions in mental health challenges, and improvements in academic learning. So we are dealing not from a position of opinion. This is why I don't think we have to get into a political fight. We don't have to say Republicans are crazy or Democrats are crazy or any of that stuff. All we have to say is the evidence supports that this works. It works to help your children feel better, behave better, and learn better. Not just at any given moment in time, but for life. The effects are long term. So, and this just, the recent, what they call, people have heard this meta-analysis term. Some of us, don't know exactly what that means, but I think we all have a little bit of a sense that means that the scholars are taking dozens, in fact, in this case, hundreds of studies, and trying to combine the outcomes from hundreds of different studies to see if there are trends or threads that are consistent across an entire field. We've got two major meta-analyses now in our field. Doesn't mean we don't have a lot of room to improve, but we do know that when we do this work well, it works. That's the most important finding.
I agree. And this is a question I'm often asked, and this is where I stick to the data because the data is clear. We have at least almost a dozen meta-analyses at this point that involve over 1 million kids across the globe that show consistent and positive impact on SEL, to your point, on a broad range of outcomes. But
Right.
I do think as we think about what could be done better, there's not a field that is not evolving. I think of the medical field. Their research doesn't just end and say, okay, we're
That's for
done.
sure.
It continues to evolve and evolve and evolve. And so there are areas that we can evolve. And I'm really proud of the leadership of our research team in particular, who has been looking and establishing even a research advisory committee to help us understand what are the gaps in the research base, not questioning the research and evidence that we already have, because to your point,
Yeah.
that's clear. But technology is changing. What is the role of social emotional learning in technology? Where is the evidence in the research going to take us? And so we need to be paying attention to what is happening in the field to help inform the research so that we can continue to evolve and grow as a field.
Yeah. I mean, we are a young field. We talked about 30 years. It feels like a long time. Maybe if we're old enough, we've lived through or professionally been a part of that kind of seems like a long trajectory. It's a very young field. Some people, when I was starting already, this started actually with John Dewey, or it started with Maria Montessori, or it started with other great educator scholars. But really, it's a very young field. We don't really know, for instance, how different instructional approaches work with specific skills. We don't necessarily know which skills matter most for classrooms, which ones are most important in discipline strategies, which ones are most important at home, community-based organizations. We don't really know how sports, I mentioned earlier, sports is such a big part of children's lives, the arts, the creative actions. How much does art by itself, just painting or playing a musical instrument or dancing or sculpting, how much does that inspire a kind of a creative connection for children that allows them to be more open to the world, more capable of seeing others from a more empathic point of view? There's so much to learn about how these things work. There's so much to learn about diverse populations. I mentioned earlier that a rural elementary school and a urban high school, many things are very different. Not to mention, we have people here I've just seen on the chat from South Africa, from Latin America, from other parts of the world. We need deep inquiry into the cultural and contextual conditions that contribute to either are these programs being effective or less effective. And then, by the way, the same thing is true of mathematics or language. It's just that we're, I think, young as a field, but we're also, as to your point, we're starving. When people say, "Hey, SEL doesn't work," my first question is, "Tell me more." Like, if it's not working, I want to. I don't want to fight you about it. I want to understand, because we want to grow and get better.
Yeah. You called out math and language arts, and it has really been interesting in this moment to see that in light of some of the political attacks or increased scrutiny, whatever you want to say, all of the disciplines that are starting to come together and align around why SEL is critical, not only for a young person's development, whether it's early childhood. We know 90% of the brain is developed by the age of 5, just the mass, the neurons, the mass of it. And then across that developmental continuum, all of the growth that is happening, and how at the core of it, relationships matter, ability to manage yourself, like how these skills show up, not just in the development, but the academic ability to perform it. I think about my oldest son, his favorite teacher and his favorite subject is the one he has the strongest relationship with. So he performs better in that class.
Yeah,
And
right.
so, and we have the International Literacy Association that just joined our coalition to say, hey, we stand with you because you know what? SEL matters in language arts. We've had the Math Association join our coalition because they're like, no, if you're going to do math, you got to have SEL skills because you've got to persist through really complex problems. You got to be able to think critically. So these skills and being able to weave together that interdisciplinary nature of the work is critical, not just to help advance and close the academic gaps, but to also ensure that the longevity of the outcomes for students, which is ultimately the business that we're in. So there's a lot of great questions, and I want to make sure.
I just wish we could, like the questions are fantastic. I just want to say we're trying to answer them, but it's almost like as an after gift of this webinar, we should send out the Q&A. It's just fantastic. Can I just make one quick point? Because it's been repeated a couple times that there's a little bit of, as one person says, a little bit of an elephant in the room here. It's this thing right here. This thing is a attention distraction machine. I agree. And it is not business as usual in the practice of helping children, what I would say, manage the faculty of attention. Right? We used to say, one of the early books that we collaborated on, many of us, emotion drives attention, and attention drives learning. In the center of that equation, the neuroscience, I think, has reinforced this idea. At the center of that equation is I would call it the faculty of attention. How right now some are watching this and they're doing emails at the same time, or they're talking, or they're eating, or they're reading something else here. So right now, many of us are trying to learn how to manage our attention. It couldn't be more urgent to double down on the pieces of the social emotional learning equation that are specifically dedicated to helping children learn how to almost like they've got a tool. It's attention. How do you use it? And when it's being taken from you, how do you get it back? And when you have it, how do you direct it? And when you lose it, how do you return? So some of this is in some of the self-awareness and self-regulation lessons. That one of the primary sets of lessons in many of our social and emotional learning programs is the capacity to regulate. Regulate is not just emotion, it's attention, right? So I just want to acknowledge, because we are a dynamic field and because the world is changing fast, that this little fella here is contributing a new set of challenges for teachers. And in my view, at least, we need a redoubled effort to figure out how to help adults and children manage the faculty of attention that they have so that they can direct it in ways that ultimately, end of any given day, they can feel like they made progress or fulfilled what they were trying to do, instead of, at the end of the day, feeling like they were overwhelmed by distraction and reactivity and exhausted by the incoming that so often steals our attention from us.
Here, 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 here. Okay, Tim, it's hard to believe we only have 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Like we've been weaving the political impact throughout. So, but there are still a couple questions coming through about politics. But let's jump into some of these questions. I have there's some really great ones, and I'm terrible at watching this while I'm presenting, so that's why I'm catching up. Tim, you talked about the social media. Oh, this is a good one. I'm curious about ways you think the field of SEL needs to innovate.
Yeah. Well, I think we touched on that a little bit. I think we need all of our evidence-based program colleagues. I mean, as everyone here knows, CASEL we don't write curriculum. We help people test, evaluate, and share great programs, not just curriculum, but systems level efforts. I think we need an infusion of support for all of the people who are building these programs, so that they can upgrade them all the time. what worked, our colleagues that have built some of these classic programs, Second Step and Ruler and Paths, and some of the ones we've seen here, Facing History. Some of these folks have been around 20 years. They need support to constantly upgrade their materials. Many of the programs, I think, would acknowledge that they have placed a strong emphasis on classrooms, not as much of an emphasis on systems and structures. So I think we need a new generation of program developers whose evidence base is supported not just by how things are taught in the classroom, but how it's integrated with discipline, we talked about parent engagement. So our program providers, I think, are moving into the space of thinking not just about instructional materials, but about systems. Big challenge. I think we need I think in some developmental levels, our programs are weaker. I think we tend to be stronger as a field in the K-8 space than we are in the 9-12 space. A lot of times schools say, we're departmentalized. Kids are preparing for SATs or preparing for, school to work challenges. SEL doesn't fit anymore. I think we have to really address that, because what you said earlier, the employers, here's what they want: people who know how to work on a team. They want people who know how to manage their emotions. They want people who know how to express themselves in a positive way. A lot of employers can train people to do the mechanical side of the job, but they find it hard to train people to do the social and emotional side. They want us to do that. So the 9-12 space, I think, is really important. I think we've got a big set of questions about school culture and climate, Aaliyah, that we're still just getting our head around. How do we measure that? The whole measurement system, we've got outcome measures that are in many of our programs, but boy, it's tough for schools to make decisions about measurement and evaluation. How to measure climate. Is our climate inclusive? Is it welcoming? Is it safe? Is it supportive of personal expression? Does it allow for a sense of agency and ownership and empowerment? These are really complicated questions that we're just still scratching the surface on.
I want to dovetail on 2 points: the classroom environment piece. In every policy conversation that I have been privy to, I was just, I think it was Tuesday this week, was at a policy forum at the White House. Classroom environment and what it should look like as we reimagine education is at the forefront of every conversation. And so I do agree unpacking that. And I would even push beyond 9-12. In higher ed institutions, there's a consortium of about 20 universities that are really putting their heads together to say, how do we integrate SEL at the higher ed level? And not just for our students, for those families who are preparing to let their 18, 19-year-old go away to college. How do we support the families of these college-aged young people so that they can also support their SEL development? So I agree. And going back to this little doodad here called the cell phone, how it has connected us globally in ways that at a push of a button, you are connected all over the world. And so understanding more the cultural nuances, and as somebody who grew up between Panama and here, there are certainly cultural nuances. And how do we tap into those differences? Because the world is only going to continue to get bigger because of the use of technology. So really diving deeper into those cultural nuances, I think it's going to be critical.
Yeah, it is. And just let me if I can make one additional point on this, the future. And again, I'm sorry to be somewhat of a parrot here, but I'm just going to parrot what Dr. Comer has been saying for most of his career. We will make fundamental change in education when preparation of teachers is grounded in, as he puts it, a basic science. And this is something he told me 35 years ago. He said, when you become a doctor, the basic science is human anatomy. Every doctor learns the basic science of how the body works, and then they develop their specialties from that. He says in education, there is no basic science right now, but it should have a basic science, and that basic science should be child development. Mm-hmm. Every educator should have a rigorous grounding in the science of child development. I was trained as a teacher. I got advanced degrees in education. I really never had a comprehensive grounding in child development. I do believe, and there's a question in the chat about this, that we will make the big shift. We'll hit the tipping point in changing this when we can get our teacher preparation programs to really take seriously what it would mean to prepare teachers, not just in pedagogy, not just in classroom management, not just in the content areas of, whether it's social studies or language arts or sciences, or other things, mathematics, but really critical grounding. Every teacher you talk to would know have a deep understanding of the patterns of early childhood, of middle childhood, of adolescence, the ways in which emotions and the brain and relationships and cognitive capabilities and behavior issues, the way they all operate throughout the developmental cycle. Wow, I wish I'd learned that before I started my career, rather than trying to learn it over time largely through the field of social and emotional learning. So I think that's a big one. And I don't think we're there yet. I think there's a lot of great teacher preparation programs. Don't get me wrong. I'm not picking on them, but I do think we have a question lurking right in front of us, which is, do we really, as a field, value understanding children in a very, very deep and rigorous way, as much as we should? I think we probably have room to grow.
Yeah. So Tim, we only have 3 minutes. And so
sorry.
I want to make sure we showcase a few upcoming things, but there's this one question that's continued to kind of draw my eye, because the reality of it is we are entering a political cycle, and there are folks who are asking this question about navigating politics because they're trying to preserve the work that's happening and also, to your point, bring people in. And the question is, I'm curious how you both conceptualize the line between not playing the political game and not speaking up about social injustices that are often labeled political. When human rights issues are labeled political, doesn't that mean SEL should not weigh in? So I will share from 2 different perspectives. One, most importantly, as the leader of CASEL, we are not going to play politics or get political, but we do have to understand the politics in which we are operating in. So there is an awareness of understanding what the perspectives are, what the political plays are, to be able to then determine, how do we lean in to clarify? Do we lean in with the data and the research, which is always the first on, it's the tip of the spear. But then also, when do we need to bring in our partners? CASEL is a collaborative, and all the while SEL, it's the core of what we do. How do we bring in our partners to also amplify those voices? The parents who support, the teachers who support, others in communities. And so it is about rallying a collective around these core issues to be able to create that drumbeat that then becomes the reverberation that policymakers then feel. And as long as we're trying to have these conversations in isolation, from my perspective, and not bringing folks together to engage in the dialogue, then it's easier to break something down when you're separated. And so we have to be more unified now than ever. And I mean, I'm very much a Black woman. I have 2 boys of color. Like, I can't pretend that the nuances of who I am doesn't impact how I'm able to move in the world, but it doesn't take away from the unifying perspectives that me as a parent versus Tim or anybody else may have to address. And how do we hone in on those things that make us more alike than different? And that's both my personal perspective kind of woven in. And Tim, I'll turn it over to you as we cue the final slides.
Well, it's hard to improve on how beautifully you said that, Aaliyah. And I think at least I speak for, I think I know many people, and being grateful that we have you in this extraordinarily important moment, in this great leadership role. I know we're struggling as a country, and I know there's a lot of politics involved in it, but I do feel like if we do exactly what you said, we talk about evidence, we talk about policies, and we talk about outcomes, we don't have to attack people. We just don't. We have to find the common ground. We have to stand our ground. But in doing so, I very firmly believe that around these issues, there is enormous room for common ground. It's not easy. Not going to say that comes quickly, but maybe stand our ground in search of common ground. I don't know. That just popped up. Anyway, I know we're out of time. I'm so grateful for all of you who joined us. I'm so grateful to be a part of this movement with this wonderful new generation of leaders. You see on the screen that we're upcoming events that are on the schedule at CASEL. I know there are lots of questions for support and community building from the Q&A. I know we'll try to respond to as many of you as we can. We continue to build, as Aaliyah so beautifully said, the collaborative in CASEL. And don't forget, SEL Week is coming up in March. We'll be talking to policymakers and with activities around the country. And then the final, I think, slide
Tim,
is for, yeah, go ahead. Sorry,
the
Aaliyah,
exchange,
over to
actually, I
you.
just want to go back one. Tim will be hosting, along with our brilliant VP of Policy, a reception in the Capitol building during National SEL Week. And it is the day before the State of the Union, which is extraordinary because we know that all of our congressmen and women will be in attendance. And for our team to be able to be on the ground, engaging with policymakers in a very real way, I think it illuminates what you're talking about, Tim, of being able to be in places and have frank conversations to support the work. And then, sorry, the last slide is our 30th celebration. You got a little clip of how we introed. I will tell Chicago Public School kiddos are so ready to be engaged and welcome us all into Chicago this year for our 30th. We hope that you'll consider joining us. It is sure to be an extraordinary event. And Tim, thank you again. I guess the third
Thank you,
time's
Dr.
a charm.
Samuel. Yeah, yeah.
All right, and we will follow up to all of our guests. Thank you so
Thank
much
you all
for
for
joining
joining
us.
us. Grateful to be in the work with all of you. Thank you.